The global cycles of life include the biogeochemical cycles. And I talked earlier about how the stock of nutrients and elements that are essential for life and that are needed in part for life move from the geosphere to through the different spheres, the atmosphere, the the hydrosphere, and now the biosphere. And so we're going to talk about how all these spheres interact in providing these key elements of life's needs. So let's stop for just a moment and make sure we're all on the same page. This is actually a book diagram that I've added our language to. So we see that in the squares we have stocks or reservoirs, as the book calls them. We have flows. The arrows represent that, and the book calls these fluxes in earth science terms. So we have stock X and we have stock Y, two different stocks. And these fluxes can go back and forth. So we're moving from our simple diagrams of one-way flows to reversible flows. And in the case of the of multiple stocks like the atmosphere and the hydrosphere and the geosphere, which land and lakes represent, we have three different stocks. We have fluxes or flows that go back and forth between them, and we can actually quantify those in terms of snapshots of time. The only thing we're missing here is the feedback or the information that characterizes what triggers a release or a control or a rate, what speeds up or slows down a particular activity. Or we're also missing signals, the things that indicate goals, paradigms, worldviews, rules, self-assembly of the system, outside influences that usually come in from one direction that inform the feedback loop. So what are the primary biogeochemical cycles? And how many spheres do they involve? And how many primary stocks and buffers do they involve? So keep in mind that some of the diagrams provided by the book will come in graphic stock and flow form, and some of the diagrams in the book will come in more traditional box and arrow form. So we're going to use both. All right, so this is an example of a graphic stock and flow diagram. And here we have a variety of stocks in the biosphere in the green, the geosphere in the brown, and the hydrosphere in the blue. And the arrows represent the flows or the fluxes, and the numbers represent the characterization of the quantity of those stocks in a snapshot in time. We see a little bit of feedback on here, but we're not going to worry so much about that right now. Let's just focus on the stocks and the flows. So what element are we talking about? We're talking about calcium. We're talking about a metallic form that does not form a gas. So the atmosphere is not involved in processing calcium. Uh, uh, the forms that calcium comes in are pretty varied. They can come in different masses or different dissolved ions, or they can be precipitated. They cycle between the geosphere, hydrosphere, and biosphere, as we just said. And the way that they cycle is through weathering of materials carried to the ocean that's attached to water molecules, and then it returns to land by plate tectonics. So the primary reservoir, the biggest stock of this material, is in the geosphere, in igneous, metamorphic, and sedimentary rocks. Uh, and that's pretty fascinating. But as you can see, calcium is part of all of these life forms. So here's another graphic flow, stock and flow diagram, and this represents sulfur. Notice all these slides have stars, so you're going to want to know these very well. The element of sulfur is non-metallic. It can form a wide variety of reduced and oxidized compounds. It comes in gaseous and mostly gaseous forms, which helps to accelerate its flux or its flow in terms of cycling. So this would be a signal, a law of nature, or a rule that's coming into the system that says that sulfur occurs mostly as a gaseous form, so that speeds up the rate of feedback in the system, even though we're not showing that feedback directly in this diagram. It cycles between all the spheres, and it's typically cycled when it's released by volcanoes in the atmosphere and enters the biosphere by water. Its primary reservoir is the geosphere because it's cycled into the atmosphere primarily by volcanoes.